Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and this is Scare-A-Thon 2023, benefiting the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project. Tonight, we're going to be talking about David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future from 2022, and I'm going to bring in my panel right now so we can give this a good old chat, and let's talk to Aaron AuBuchon, Christianne Benedict, Dominic Conti, and Mackenzie Parker. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, glad to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So,
Thank you.
Let's dive in, shall we? This is David Cronenberg. He was 79 when he shot this, and it was the first kind of sci-fi horror thing that he'd done since 1999's Existenz. And it definitely feels like a return to form for me. It also feels like a bit of a greatest hits. Anybody want to dive in and speak to that?
Well, Cronenberg is a true auteur insofar as he never throws anything away. So, of course, all of his films, especially in the last 20 years, you can go through and you can catalog all of the elements that are common to his earlier films. So,
for sure. And there's a lot of callback, and I wouldn't even say they're intentional callbacks, but it does feel like we're seeing, like we're seeing signs of Videodrome, we're seeing signs of Existenz, we're seeing all of those elements, and but it doesn't feel like fan service to me, at least.
No, as somebody who my own gravitational pull tends to be towards artists and directors who find a way to rediscover and re-explore and redeploy their own sensibilities over and over again. And so for me, this is a Cronenberg who hasn't just returned to form, but has found ways to weave those things together that maybe had occupied separate boxes in the past. And so I was super delighted with this film. You mentioned Videodrome; that stands atop the summit of Mount Cronenberg for me. But climbing the north side of that face is this film. It's creeping up on it for me.
Awesome, Dominic.
Let's get a naked lunch reference in there, because it felt like that business abounded throughout. We didn't have a talking beehole, but I mean, really, there was quite a bit of, the gross equipment, the something that he presses that's fleshy, the bed, the chair he had, that harked to Naked Lunch, which I need to revisit. I've only seen that once.
Well, and that same thing, kind of this sparked an interest. I was like going, you know what? It would be a great time to go back and revisit the Cronenberg canon. Mac?
Yeah, just let me open up my sexy stomach zipper and let everybody have a taste. I really love this movie. I there's something about Cronenberg for me that I relate to that I can't quite put to words. I love his I think this movie is actually fairly optimistic about the future. And as much as I think Cronenberg is always thinking about or kind of communicating, where we're going next and what's ahead for our bodies, our minds, and the world. And I think I really love the aesthetic of this movie. It's really reminds me of the French term "les pieds de Dieu," the feet of the gods. It's both attractive and repellent at the same time, like some good cheeses. And I dig this movie a lot.
Oh, Mac, you stayed up late last night thinking of that one. That's good. That's good. And we have Viggo Mortensen as our central figure, and he's kind of become Cronenberg's go-to actor. And I used to say, like, James, I think Videodrome is one of James Woods' best performances. I think The Fly is one of Jeff Goldblum's best performances. I think, Dead Ringers is one of Jeremy Irons' best performances.
Chris Walken in The Dead Zone.
Dead Zone. So it's like, I just like this. He knows how to really draw out great performances from at least his male actors. And yet, I mean, where do you think this falls in the whole Viggo Mortensen pantheon with Cronenberg?
Personally, I was just offended that it wasn't Michael Ironside.
Speaking of great performances.
Yeah. I think this is right up there with some of my favorite performances of his. And as far as Cronenberg goes, I mean, I'd like more Viggo Mortensen fighting nude in a bathhouse in this movie as far as Cronenberg movies go. But I love this performance. I think it's very well measured. The mannerisms that he has as the character, the pain he seems to be in that he's communicating throughout the movie it's wonderful. And especially this time around, the look on his face when he starts to digest the purple chocolate bar, it's wonderful. I see why Cronenberg's fascinated with him. He's so subtle, but also so animated at the same time. He's great.
I 100% back that and would love to piggyback real quick. I think, as an actor, you watch a performance like that and he makes the difficult, the halting speech that he completely integrated into every moment of every scene. It could be actory in a lot of different people's hands. And I think he really makes it seem 100% like that person. And, on a movie set, you have no rehearsal. I don't know when he worked on it. I think he and the director must have been absolutely simpatico to make that happen as well as it did.
Yeah, there's certainly, that speaks to kind of like the fact that they've collaborated on, I think, is it 4 or 5 films now?
Is it that many?
Technically, it's 5 because Mortensen directed Cronenberg in a film 2 years ago.
That's right.
Which one is that?
The Falling, I think, is the name of it. I don't remember the exact title.
Yeah, Falling with Lance Henriksen as the dad.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I'll look into that. Is that a full-length film?
It is. Okay. And Lance Henriksen plays the most bastardy bastard you've ever seen. Okay. Yeah, it's it's a tough sit, but I think it's a worthwhile sit.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Mortensen in this film a lot, and I think this is a different performance than his previous ones for Cronenberg because I think he's playing Cronenberg. I think that the character of Saul Tenser is Cronenberg, who is an artist who is aging, who is uncomfortable most of the time, such that he has to rely on his technology, and he's trying to make art through all of it.
He does kind of sound like Cronenberg now that you mention it. His voice a little bit is kind of Cronenberg-y. He looks great, Silver Fox, in this movie.
Indeed. I'd do that.
Everybody looks good in this movie. It's a good-looking cast.
It is.
Yeah, Léa Seydoux as oh shoot, I'm blanking on her character's name. It's because it's a great name. Caprice. I was like, oh my gosh, what a wonderful name. And Cronenberg always has great names for his characters. I mean, and this is no exception. But Léa Seydoux plays kind of the setup is that Saul Tenser, Mortensen's character, is he's dying, but he's creating these kind of like not tumors, but just actually new organs, and that he and his performance art partner Caprice, they do surgeries as performance art where the new organs are cut out and then registered. But that seems to be the way that the human race is moving, is that it's almost evolving / mutating into something that is no longer human. And that's a theme that Cronenberg has certainly tackled in the past. You said something, Mac, about it being a more optimistic view. It's interesting because, like you think about like the end of Scanners, where it's like, when after the big scanner battle and you see him look at the camera and say, "We've won." And you're like, did we though? And I kind of felt the same here. It's kind of like, you see this kind of beatific look on his face and you're like, I'm not sure what he's going through, if he's, what's happening for him.
I mean, in this movie and in Scanners, there's kind of this divide between, philosophical divide in among the people who are changing, and then also among, people that aren't changing, the humans. And I just think by the end of the movie, I feel a sense of optimism, even though the world that they're living in seems to be, I don't know, sort of rotting over, and the fact that we have to survive by adapting and eating plastics and man-made chemicals isn't the most beautiful idea, but or the most appealing notion. But I think in the eyes of Saul Tenser, there's something optimistic to me about the way that he finally accepts who he is and what he is by the end, and I feel that definitely.
The recurrent theme of what is aberration, because Cronenberg's always on the side of the so-called aberrant thing. You know, he's a race car driver, and then he directs. You know, so he's on the side of, you know, let's have some, you know, the crashing is what cars do. You know, so there's the aberrance, and there's always mutation. There's always, you know, and I'm trying to search for.
Well, it's an evolutionary.
I mean, a person was on fire in Maps to the Stars. That's a sort of transformation. Yeah. Sets themselves on fire.
There, in the negative space of this film, there's sort of this feeling of ecological apocalypse, and you know, the people that are able to process the new polluted world in which they live in. I mean, you know, the ocean has so much plastic in it at this point. You know, that's the next step of survival, because it's an adaptation to the prevailing conditions.
I think I'm still thinking, Mac, about your idea of that being an uplifting ending, and you know, that's really new news to me, and I'm gonna keep pondering that. I just, you know, just after the second time through, I think I liked it more the second time through, but now, you know, I will watch it again sometime, and I'll think of it like, is that a potential spin? It could be happy.
Well, it's interesting because I think you said it, Dominic, the idea that Cronenberg's on the side of the mutation, you know, that it isn't, you know, the disease is just doing what the disease does. The disease isn't malevolent. The disease is just growing, and these organs are just growing. And I think there's some sly commentary on the whole idea of art and commercialism and, you know, and pollution and environment. I feel like this is certainly and it's a statement from an older filmmaker, and yet there's still that same theme running through all of his films. You know, I feel like this is a subject he has. I think you said that, Aaron. Like, this is a subject he has. He's kind of threading back through a lot of the themes that he's discussed in the past.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the things that I think is really interesting about this particular exploration is that it feels like he explores trauma a lot, but he doesn't do it as explicitly as I feel like he does it. I mean, the characters say, what is the line? I've got it written down. I enjoy trauma. And to me, in this day and age, that feels revolutionary, you know, at a time when we are often expected to be defined by our trauma and actively attempting to flee from our trauma or heal our trauma. The notion that people are actively engaging in new trauma feels like a pretty revolutionary idea. For a filmmaker to throw out there as an aspirational goal, like, we don't have enough trauma in our past, we should find some new trauma in our future. So I thought that was at least dangerous, and it made me think.
Go ahead, Dominic. You go ahead.
Oh no, I think great point, but also the idea that, like, this is not entirely new. You know, I forget the name of the fellow who shot himself as performance art. I wanted to make sure I mentioned Bob Flanagan, who was a man with cystic fibrosis who, like, performed as a performance artist and was a writer. And so this is the new performance art and the new trauma, you know, but still, you know, still new, but not entirely unlike what we've done before.
There's also, I was saying, like, there's some comedy in here, but like that whole thing of like being in the bed and being in the chair, and those, you know, like, this is supposed to ease, and it's supposed to make you feel, you know, it's like supposed to help you digest perfectly. And it just looks like a joke. You're like, there's no way that is better for you than just sitting still and eating your food, or, you know, being in a bed and being like just tossed all over the place. But also, Saul Tenser is an aberration in this world, in that he feels pain. And they say that there are, they say that many of the population just doesn't feel pain anymore. And that pain's important. Pain is a signal from the body. And that's one of those things where it's like, if you don't feel pain, if we are inured to our pain, does that make us more or less human?
There's a whole conversation about it, isn't there? Where, what's it feel like when he's out of the bed and on the floor, and she's kind of quizzing him, like, what does it feel like? And yet they're obviously having reaction to stimuli that would be painful for all the rest of us. And he is putting up with pain that I don't think most humans would be able to put up with. So I also had the feeling, or at least was asking myself the question, does he feel all the same pains, or does he just feel a different kind of pain?
I think he says different. He talks about his pain centers changing and shifting. And she asks, is it better or worse? And he says, just different for now,
Well, since we mentioned the woman that talks about the trauma and the bed and we've got the chair as well. Good time to talk about the makeup effects, and the special effects of this movie are incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't note who those people were. Because it's not Chris Walas, who did Naked Lunch and The Fly, but it feels like the same DNA, right? It feels like that same kind of fleshy. I mean, when he's lying in the bed and like the things are kind of like slapped onto him, and it feels so kind of truly biomechanical.
Yeah, I think the depiction of tech in this film is sort of a combination of Naked Lunch and Existenz, because the controller looks like an evolution of the controllers from Existenz, and the bed and the chair look like they were built from the carcasses of mugwumps.
I love how the technology looks almost organic. It goes so well in hand with this movie, of just like as people are becoming less human, it seems like our machinery is becoming weirdly more human.
And couple that with the almost indecipherable production design of the film. Like, I can't wrap my head exactly around why it looks like the entire thing looks like it's set in a crumbling version of the 1920s that had fast forwarded to the 1950s. Like the whole world had been abandoned in 1927, and then this film was made in 1956. And it has the strangest look about it. Everything's kind of gray and dirty. It's got a very, very interesting production design.
And there's also a very strong stripe of sexuality running through it, which is nothing new for Cronenberg.
Yeah.
But it's always like the least sexy sex that you could ask for, where you're like, I don't know how I feel about this. And Kristen Stewart's character at one point says, surgery is the new sex. And she imagines Saul Tenser, cutting into her.
Yeah.
And what do we make of that, that framing of sexuality in this new world?
One thing I love is how they have that scene, because if we're going to extend the metaphor that Saul and Cronenberg are the same person, that one scene that ends with him saying, "I'm no good at the old sex," is particularly telling.
Yeah, Videodrome has a new flesh. Here's we got the old sex. Yeah. As far as criticisms go, I really enjoyed the multiple factions. There's always in a number of movies, there always seems to be warring factions and splinter groups trying to work on the main character. He's working with the police. Here's this other faction that's putting holes in people's heads. And I think the second time through, I'm not so put off that it kind of begins in the middle and ends in the middle. But I would have loved a bigger set piece involving these factions, and maybe a wilder ending leading to the sort of denouement of him eating into the plastic. I think I would have liked that. I don't know what the designs were, how much money they had.
Well, and I think that you're right, Dominic, because I kind of had the same feeling in that a lot of these themes have been discussed before, but there's always been a sense of momentum.
Yeah.
And I feel like Cronenberg's not in a huge hurry to get anywhere on this one. Like he's in a more contemplative mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mackenzie described this as an optimistic film. I would describe it as a serene film. I think there's a certain level of acceptance of death and acceptance of change in this film. We've been talking a great deal about what's the through line from Cronenberg's other films, but there is a lot that's new in this film too. Most of Cronenberg's films, major films, seem to exist on the edge of an apocalypse, like the scanner war, or the Videodrome takeover, or whatever. This seems like it takes place afterwards. This feels like it takes place. This feels like it takes place in the same universe as Existenz, only maybe about 30 years later or so. One of the things that really struck me was the sense that you're looking at a story that's taking place in the ruins of empire. I mean, you have all of those derelict ships; they're beautifully photographed.
That opening shot.
Yeah, exactly, and that's sort of a callback to the end of Videodrome, because I mean that's where James Woods goes to become the new Flesh at the end of that film. He goes to a derelict ship. But in that film, I mean, there's a certain amount of horror of the dereliction of the world falling into chaos. And this film, I think it's finding, I don't know, beauty in it and serenity. I think it also that may also be a function of this being the first film in 30 years that wasn't shot by Peter Shasitsky, and also not being shot in Toronto. It was shot in Greece.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the first original script he's done, right? Since Existenz.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's the case. Yeah.
I feel like they've either been co-written or adaptations, or things of that nature. And it's kind of interesting that they almost correspond with his collaboration with Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to have us kind of like everything circling back around. It's like, okay, I'm going to write my own script and you're going to play me this time.
There's something to me that's like, it makes me hark to, they're not the same films, but Robert Altman's last one, A Prairie Home Companion, where there was a sort of ease to that and a pretty much a non-interest in like really standard plotting. And this has that sort of showing you the events, but not in a hurry, and also not really in a hurry to finish in what people might usually expect a finish to be.
Oh, I think it's piggybacking off what he said. I really like how that it like a lot of Cronenberg's movies sort of starts in the middle, where there's no like in a world where people eat plastic at the beginning, or there's no easy answers or laying things out. And I think that's also maybe partly why Dominic maybe was craving more, because it is such an interesting world, and there is so much that's alluded to and suggested that you're just like, oh, I want to know more about that. What's that about?
That's true. Curiosity on my part, for sure.
Yeah. Well,
the idea of the plastic, I mean, that's kind of what the film opens with, and I don't think this is much of a spoiler, but it opens with a murder of a mutation, and that is, and that murder circles back around to wanting to bring this mutation to light, to show that like this is the new Flesh, this is the road to survival, this is the path forward for humanity, and it's repellent to the person that kills that character in the beginning. They can't stand the sight of this, and yet if this is the path forward, like how are we not embracing it and going, oh, well, like if we're going to adapt to this world that we've kind of shit all over and made into this nightmare of plastic and waste, like what choice do we have? And I think that's kind of the Splinter Group's idea, the rebels as they were, is to be like, this is what we're going to do, is we're going to survive.
Yeah, that's the crux of the film's politics, isn't it? Like, what is human? Who has control of what is defined as human? Who has control of what you can do with your own body? Which, I mean, it's not lost on me that this film came out, six months before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Right. I mean, this is very much a conversation that's happening in the real world.
One thing I'd like to say about that whole eating of plastic thing is one of the things that I really, really admire about Cronenberg, and I admire about this film immensely, is I love surrealism, but surrealism often lends itself to little bursts that happen. I'm interested in trying this thing out, and then I do it, and then I move on to the next thing. And a lot of directors who have been accused of surrealism fall into that plotting device. But here you've got a movie that begins and ends with the same concept, and it's never over-explained, but it remains the thing that ties the whole thing together. So there's some really masterful storytelling around all of these ideas that don't necessarily tie back to anything that we can easily wrap our hands around, So there's both really, really excellent storyline and plotting, as well as little flights of fancy and whimsy that don't necessarily have to go anywhere, but certainly are nice little avenues to consider.
I would like to just kind of Sir, so I can safely say, though, this is not one of my favorite Cronenberg films. Like I feel like this is a film that I admire and appreciate, but it isn't one that necessarily jazzes me. And I would have to probably go back to, the 80s to find those films that really do jazz me about coming out of Cronenberg. I like Crash a lot. I like Existenz. But in terms of the films that made me a Cronenberg fan, I don't know if this would ever have been one of them.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
I have that experience every time I see a new Cronenberg film. I walk out of the theater and I think, what the hell was that? and I have to sit with it for a while. I mean, and usually, except maybe for The Fly, which is as populist as Cronenberg gets. Almost every one of his films, I don't want to see it again anytime soon because it's a very unpleasant experience to watch them. But they get under your skin, and it compels you to revisit them, later down the line because you don't forget them.
Yeah,
and I think that's going to be the case with this film too. And although I knew instantly that I was going to like this film, so.
Me too.
I get as much rewatching this guy's films as anyone's. Like, the second go around with Dead Ringers was not better because I love discovering it the first go around, but like Maps to the Stars is a better movie the second time.
I have this fantasy that that this film exists in an alternate reality in which Robert Pattinson plays Saul Tenser and Kristen Stewart plays Caprice. Because he's collecting the set,
Yeah, it's great to see Kristen Stewart out and about. I love what actors do when they're sort of post-franchise in their careers and the choices they make. And Kristen Stewart's one of those that I love to see what she does, and Robert Pattinson as well. I'd love to see that version you just described.
Well, speaking of good performances in Cosmopolis, I thought he was really good, and he's
fantastic.
Kind of all him, there's a lot of great supporting people, but that's his movie.
Well, and I do like the fact that, yes, they are the Twilight kids, but they've, shown us both before and after that they are so much better than that. And that's why they got hired for the job in the first place, because they were really good actors who'd be able to carry that fluffy of a plot. Yeah, exactly.
And let's be honest, they've got their screw you money now.
Yep.
So they're good.
They do what they get to do now. Yeah.
That's why what they do is what the choices they make are so interesting to me, because like they don't have to prove themselves anymore.
Yeah,
it's like Daniel Radcliffe, same thing. Elijah Wood, like they don't have to answer to anybody anymore.
Yeah, work for scale. Their whole family is taken care of forever, and now they can do it.
Yeah. Kristen Stewart in this film gives maybe the most Cronenberg-y performance in any of his films that I've seen in the last 20 years.
Yeah,
because it's just full of theatrical ticks.
She's basically me as a Cronenberg fan in this movie. I'm into it. You guys are all uncomfortable, and I'm like, wow, the horror of being a body.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, everybody. This is, again, I agree. I think this is one of these films that is one we'll probably circle back around to in like 10 years and be like, so let's talk about this movie again. Just to see how it's changed and how we've changed, in the next 10 years, because I think that's also something like going back and watching Cronenberg's early films is a completely different experience for me than it was when I first discovered them. And I love that in a filmmaker. You mentioned Dead Ringers, Dominic. Like that was a film I studied in college as a philosophy of film class. And it was really one of those where you go, oh, wow, there is so much happening. And even though I knew what a director did, I'm kind of like, this is what a director can do. And I love the fact that I had that kind of laid out for me in an academic setting. So perhaps this will be one of those that will be taught in a class someday in the near future. Mr. AuBuchon?
Yep, might be.
And we'll be eating our purple chocolate bars while we watch it and discuss it.
Exactly.
You should circle around to the Amazon miniseries of Dead Ringers that came out this year at some point in the future.
Oh wow,
it's good.
It's interesting.
Okay,
yeah, it is.
Thanks for the rec. All right, cool. Well, thanks again, everybody. This has been Scare-A-Thon 2023, benefiting the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project. And as Christianne mentioned, it is a cause that is near and dear to our hearts. The Link to donate is below in the description, so please make a donation should you feel so inclined. We will be back some more of Scare-A-Thon 2023. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.